Hey, good morning, everyone. It's Friday morning and it's time for Hollywood Breaks. Welcome again to our show. It's so good to have you joining us today. And of course, I couldn't be here without our Hollywood insider, Keith Rao. Keith, happy Friday from Philadelphia.
Happy Friday, Tim. Always good to see you.
Yeah, you too. You know that there's a part of my day, about halfway through Thursday, where I think, oh crud, tomorrow's Hollywood Breaks. I gotta kind of get my act together.
What are we
Keith's
going to
gonna know
talk
so
about?
much more than me. And you send this string of articles, and I read through them, and I think, okay, I think I understand what's going on with where Keith's mind is. I have to admit, you always blow me away at the connections that you can, this web you have in your head, and connections you can make between all of this
Yeah,
stuff happening in Hollywood and some of the
yeah,
trends that are happening. So every Friday morning, I look forward to like, all right, unpack this thing for me, because there's usually something good happening going on.
yep. I'm never worried about having something to talk about when it comes to Friday. That's for sure.
All right, so before we get started too far,
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings. I see the poster.
Yes, Lord
That's
of the Rings. So,
obviously a great show, great
yeah,
film.
yeah. This is the Return of the King final poster, I believe.
Oh, so
Actually,
that's the Oscar-winning Lord of the Rings.
that is
That's
the
the one they go
Oscar
into.
winning. It's funny
Yeah.
you should bring up an Oscar, Tim. I'm going to get to that in just a second. But
Oh yeah.
yes, I did not work on the design of this poster. I was in film development at New Line Cinema. I was not in marketing at that particular point in time in my career. This poster was designed by a company called Schulery Design. I'm not familiar with them, but I guess they've done a lot of posters for New Line and Warner Brothers. So yeah, this was the final one sheet. I was there when we released the movie. It was a great experience.
Sure.
It was the culmination of the 3 years or the three films, and it was sort of a time when the entire leadership team looked back on when Peter Jackson showed up and just basically showed them a bunch of previs, and based on that, Bob Shaye agreed to do 3 movies all in a row, which
Yeah.
was
Wow.
unprecedented at the time, and obviously
So
it paid off in
you were
dividends.
there probably in like the relief phase of like, okay, we no longer have to travel,
Yeah,
3/4 of the year.
yeah,
That because it's epic the amount of time and effort and money and people that
yeah.
they were
The
moving like over the planet.
yeah, the executive who was in charge of it, Mark Ordesky, actually had moved to New Zealand. Was basically in New Zealand for a bulk of the shoot for the movie,
Yeah.
movies, I should say. And then get back to your Oscar point. So one of the really cool things about working at New Line was it really was a family. And Bob Shaye really, who was this co-chairman and CEO and founder of the company, really believed that. So one of the things that he did for all the employees after the film won Best Picture is they let every employee take a picture with the Oscar. So this is my photo. I don't know if you guys can, yep, there you go.
Oh, that's
The actual
great.
Oscar. So yeah, this was way back when. You can see the New Line logo in the background,
Oh
and
yeah.
every employee got to take a picture with the Oscar, and Bob Shaye paid for all the photos. The company paid for all the photos. So we all got
That's so
our own
cool.
photos. So this is my claim to fame. I actually got to hold an Oscar,
Oh wow.
which is a lot heavier than you might think.
Oh no, they're great. I remember
Yeah,
working on the show and just seeing, there was like just a shelf, banks and banks of these, and the
yeah,
security guards there, whatever, just hold there. But every time, the person walked off stage, early on they tried to take the statuette away from the person because it was a prop, because they didn't know how many statuettes they needed, right,
right.
based on who was winning,
Yeah,
especially Best Picture. So they would kind of just have things moving around, and no, they don't do that anymore. They couldn't get the statuettes away from the
no.
people that.
I mean, people have been campaigning for them for like 6 months. I'm like, I'm not letting go of this thing.
No way, you need it for
Too
the after
hard
party.
for it.
One of my favorite moments early on was when I was a PA. I was a PA on the Oscars, and I had just gotten the job at RGA Los Angeles, which eventually became Imaginary Forces. And we were wrapping up Braveheart, so I did the opening credits for Braveheart. I met the DP, obviously, the whole team, directors, all that kind of stuff. Great little experience. And then I go back to the show, the Oscars for that last year, and they won. So
Yeah,
so now these Oscar winners are walking into the after party, and I used to just sneak into the after party, and they recognize me. and they're like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And before, like, so I'm now like in the circle of Oscar winners, and I'm just some. I mean, I don't even think people knew my name at RGA at this point. I
Right.
was kind of the new guy there and just a PA at the Oscars. But when you know the right people, I get there. It's so fun. It's like what a magical thing to be around. It truly is one of Hollywood's greatest moments is the Oscars. So
Yeah,
good for you.
I mean, yeah, it was really cool because we were all at, you know, a big Oscar party, because New Line's parties were legendary. It was just a surreal experience to, you know, when they announced it and the place just went nuts. I mean,
Yeah.
it was a cool experience to be part of that. And the only other experience I can reference to that is when Ang Lee won Best Director for Life of Pi, because I was heavily involved in sort of that campaign to help get him that win. So that was another great Oscar moment for me.
So cool. Yeah. I love it. It's like, and when you're at the party, isn't one of those pinch me moments? Like, you know, when you're kind of growing up, you hope to be in the room, and then
Yeah, you're in
like
the room.
it's happening. It's us. We're the team, or we're the group that's
Yeah,
throwing the
I
party.
mean, the Oscars are great, but I have to say the Globes are a lot more fun.
Oh yeah,
That
yeah,
that's definitely a true. I mean, I know a lot of people say like the Globes. The Oscars are great in terms of just the spectacle of it all, but the Globes are fun because everybody's there
yeah.
and everyone just sort of moves from party to party. So the year that my wife and I went, well, I think it was also the year of Life of Pi. We just stayed and we, you know, watched it from the party room, and then at the end of the show, everybody comes to the party, like everybody who's affiliated with News Corp and 21st Century Fox, which is with News Corp at the time. They all just come to the party. So Rupert Murdoch's there, all the people,
Yeah.
you know, cast of Modern Family, and then you get all the stars moving from other parties. So like the Warner Brothers folks would come over to our party, and that was a really cool experience.
And it's actors and singers and film and
It's everybody. It's
TV.
film and TV. It's just everybody mingles
Yeah.
together. It's a lot
That
of
was
fun.
part of when I was at Dick Clark. You know, was part of the circuit when you did the live
Yeah.
TV shows, like American Music Awards, Golden
Right.
Globes,
Yep.
AFI Awards. We all did the circuit. It's again just it's the craziest thing when you're standing on the red carpet and that show you've always seen your whole life, or the people you've seen your whole life are just standing in front of you. So awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, Hollywood really is magical.
Yep.
Which is probably what inspires you and I to want to talk about it, because there's just things
and keep working in it. Yeah, despite all the nuts and bolts and craziness.
Yeah. And I have to say, like, this week, I feel like we should change the name of our show from Hollywood Breaks to Hollywood Reorganizes, because it just seems like all the reorg,
Reorg Part 50.
the shift and the moves and the people and who's going and coming or whatever. Obviously, some of the bigger stuff that's happening just with Disney and the whole reorg that they have going on. It's so curious, isn't it, that the challenge that they're trying to take on by merging two studios into one does create some animosity. And I guess when it first happened, I imagined that the Disney execs kind of knew their folks and they didn't know the Fox people. So I kind of figured, like, well, the Fox people are just going to miss out. I mean, like, you're not known and you're going to kind of miss the mark. Some of this stuff that's happening now, you kind of think like, I think they kind of know who they're going to keep and who they're not. And the Fox folks seem to be holding some good ground. Maybe it's because Fox is awesome, as you would always attest to, but the whole new thing under Peter Rice, right? That's the thing, is like Peter Rice is kind of, like winning the arm wrestling in a way and taking over DGE.
Yeah, I mean, well, Peter Rice and Dana Walden and Courtney Monroe from Nat Geo are all very significant higher ups in the Disney TV organization. So, and they're all former Fox people. So they've clearly established a foothold in the organization as a whole. So essentially what happened this week, going to the reorg of it all, was that Peter Rice, who's now chairman of the recently rebranded, I guess, Disney General Entertainment Content Division, which is the sort of the TV side of this new reorg that Disney's undertaking. He basically did a sort of reorganization in terms of his direct reports as well as marketing. So the marketing side of things is now going to sort of be split up into two like agencies. So there's going to be one agency that's going to sort of report into the head of the Disney branded channels, linear and streaming. So that would be Disney Plus, Disney Channel, and then there's going to be another section that's going to be all the linears that are non-Disney. So like Hulu, ABC News, all those channels are going to be under a separate agency. So that's sort of the beginning of sort of placating off the divisions and reporting them up to each division head, and those division heads report up to Peter. So that's sort of the beginning of the shuffling of the chairs. I don't think this is the end. I think there's a lot more coming.
But isn't it interesting, like, so you have Kareem Daniels, his job now is to basically centralize some of the content strategy distributions. He holds the purse string kind of a thing to all content. And then we now have Peter Rice taking on this new role at DGE. But then what's interesting is like, then Peter kind of silos it off. Do you have a sense of like what the silos are? I mean, if we had to speculate where the division's taking place, is it like traditional content or linear content or digital or marketing strengths, or what do you think that they're thinking through?
The division is definitely based, I think, on sort of the brand. So classic Disney, they are protecting that Disney brand. They are keeping it siloed away from sort of the Hulus, the Nat Geos of the world, and sort of just keeping it sort of in the usual fold that they normally do keep it in. If you say, for example, if you look at what happens on Disney Plus, that's all family-oriented brands, and then everything that's not family-oriented goes over to Hulu.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the idea. So, for example, the agency is going to oversee the Disney Plus and the linear networks, including Disney Channel, Disney Junior, Disney XD, and actually Nat Geo. So I was incorrect by saying Nat Geo is going to be on the other side, but
yeah.
So, and then the other content is going to be every agency is going to oversee Disney Television Studios, which is the former 20th Century Fox TV production arm, which is where Dana Walden comes in. Hulu Originals, ABC Entertainment, Freeform, and ABC News. So those are sort of the more adult skewing sections, and then sort of the family friendly, which is Disney, is sort of siloed over on this side. So they're still keeping them siloed, and that's sort of the breakout of the silos. It's like sort of protect the Disney brand, and then the other side is sort of the brands that are sort of outside the Disney purview, more adult skewing. So again, the priority is protecting the Disney brand.
Earlier you read a quote about I think it was Peter Rice basically talking about what their primary roles are going to be: development, production, and marketing.
Yeah.
And so, go ahead if you have that quote in front of you. But
I have the quote right here. So he sent an internal memo, and this is on Variety. And what he said was, quote, "For our team, so this reorg, this means we will wholly focus our resources and efforts on developing, producing, and marketing exceptional content to fuel the company's streaming and linear platforms, while our colleagues at Disney Media and Entertainment Division," that's the new division head up by Kareem, "will distribute and monetize that content and run the linear networks and streaming platforms." So what I think is interesting about this is when this was first announced, my understanding was these divisions were content creators. But Peter Rice seems to be saying, no, we're going to create it and produce it, but we're also marketing it. So we're not giving up the power to market yet, because in the traditional terms in the industry, distribution covers marketing.
Yeah, sure.
So for example, when you break out and take it to a traditional studio, production covers like, development, post, visual effects, all that stuff. Distribution is marketing and just the distribution and
getting the theaters getting the theater deals in place, who's going to capture it, so
distribution. So one would think, given the title of Kareem's division, marketing would sort of somewhat shift over to him, but Peter seems to be saying, no, marketing is staying with me. So I don't know if this is some sort of like laying the sort of guardrails, because Peter's also the first to announce the reorg. We haven't heard from Alan Horner and Alan Bergman at the studio side. We don't know what that's going to look like. We haven't heard from ESPN and sort of what the sports side is going to look like. So Peter's the first one stepping out, which doesn't surprise me, because Peter's very much about being upfront and in, making the decision quickly versus
Plus,
letting
he
his
was like president of Fox. Like he doesn't work for people in a way. Like he runs his own way and thinks his own
yeah.
way. I have to imagine that kind of leadership or entrepreneurial edge he has doesn't really make him stay within structures very well.
Yeah, and as Cameron and I talked about last week, that's very much a Fox culture thing.
Right.
It very much was like, do what you think you need to do for the business. Like, don't wait for Rupert to approve it. Just go. And, some of that was because we were a very tightly run organization. So you kind of had to be entrepreneurial to figure out how to get things done.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that culture, because Peter grew up at Fox. Like, he started as a CE and the Fox side, and then he went over to Searchlight, and then he started Atomic, and then he went from Atomic over to the network side. So clearly the Murdochs were grooming him for a larger role. And then when he went over to Disney, it was clear that, Bob Iger saw a role for him in the Disney side.
Yeah, sure.
Well.
But his success at Fox and Fox building up
Yeah.
the Fox network. And Disney kind of needs some help, especially with some of those off brands that they have. They're not necessarily strong network presence. Yeah.
Right. So that to me is the very interesting part about this, because when they first made the announcement, my reading of the tea leaves was that marketing was going to somewhat be almost sort of have a dual report into Kareem and whoever the division heads. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Like, for example, for the ABC Entertainment, Freeform, Disney Television Studios, that agency is reporting up into Dana Walden, who's the head of Disney Television.
Yeah.
She's the content creator. So it's interesting still, marketing is still sitting underneath the creators, where you would think if they truly want to make it the Kareem's division sort of the distribution arm, then the marketing should start to sort of focus over there. But that doesn't look like that's the
I guess in my
intent.
mind, what I'm hearing too is like it's basically have to go up the channel and then come back down to kind of do the marketing strategy, because you're making the content, you're producing it, and then someone decides how it's going to be distributed, and then it takes a curve and it comes back to you of how to market it based on that distribution.
Which to me is a bit of a mistake almost.
Yeah.
Because I think when you're developing that strategy, it's all about where's your audience at? Where are they living? Like, for example, a Disney Plus audience isn't necessarily the same audience as a Disney theatrical audience, depending on the movie. And a Hulu audience isn't necessarily the same as a Disney Plus audience. So if you start marketing content and you think it's going to be on Disney Plus, you develop a strategy based on the Disney Plus audience, where they are, where they spend most of their time. If it's a mom-driven movie, then you're probably going to focus more on Facebook, because moms spend a lot of time on Facebook. If it's more younger, you're going to do Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, those kinds of sources. But if you shift midstream, that requires a change in strategy.
So it makes me think like, go ahead.
Which to me means that there's going to be a sort of, okay, let's start over again. And it goes back to what Cameron and I discussed briefly last week, when the sort of Fox strategy was like the creative, it's like ready, fire, aim, which doesn't really. Well,
you can see it play out three ways, right? One is Kareem's going to be basically part of the green light process and already know distribution before he even lets you make the thing. So he's either going to be earlier in the process, right? Or he's going to eventually be pushed out of the process, because no one's going to wait, especially if you're Peter Rice, entrepreneur guy from Fox. You're not going to wait for the big wigs to tell you what to do before you start your process. You're going to start marketing to whoever the hell you want to market it to. And then later on, they're going to decide maybe they should distribute the content where Peter Rice decided the marketing. Yeah. So it could be pushed out later on, or just basically become ineffective. That's a possible issue there too. Well, but you can understand the rub. Like, you're right. There's just like, man, the web that people have to weave in order to get things through the network can be crazy.
What's interesting to me is Disney has always been, especially on the theatrical side, the strategy-driven studio. Always. Like, they have a very effective strategy team. They go deep dives into sort of the strategy of the film, the release pattern, all of that stuff before they really dive into the creative side of things. Now this seems to be going to the way kind of Fox used to do things, which was we just dive into the creative, and whatever creative was best for the movie, that would inform the strategy.
Yeah.
That's never been Disney's way of doing things. And that's not always an effective way of doing it, especially in this day and age when you have so much competition for eyeballs. Strategy is very important. And it seems to me that this process, if it goes the way it looks like it's going to go, you're right, it's a very tangled web, and strategy is going to be constantly shifting and changing, which is not always good for effective marketing plan.
So as we said, maybe we should change the name to Hollywood Reorgs, because I have a feeling this is the beginning of a lot of reorg within Disney.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but you can understand some of what they're trying to figure out. You know, they just did their quarterly report release. What we found out now is Disney Plus has 76 million subscribers, paid subscribers too, by the way. So they're possibly, you know, the number two in the number two position of OTT platforms. I don't know how they rank, but it seems to be climbing pretty fast for a 1-year-old platform. Obviously, pretty awesome.
Well, yeah, I mean, they got to the point where even Reed Hastings of Netflix complimented on them on their start. I mean, they forecasted out, I think, 5 years to be at 60 million. They got there in under a year. So, and now this quarter they added an additional 16 million. I'm sorry, they had 73 million. So they added an additional 13 this quarter. You know, the results were disappointing, obviously, because the parks are still closed. California looks like it's going to be closed at least through the end of the year, which is crushing to Disney, because so much of their revenue was based on their park success. So billions, obviously they lost a chunk of money, but it wasn't as much as the street predicted. So in a way, it wasn't necessarily as bad an earnings call as you would expect in this environment. They're obviously very bullish on what's happening with streaming and Disney Plus. With Soul coming out at Christmas, a new Pixar movie, they've got an opportunity to again brandish more subscribers, and it's more original content.
I do think some of those subscribers are still inflated, though. Like, I still haven't paid for Disney Plus. I'm still on the Verizon 1-year thing. I think mine's going to expire soon. Yeah. And I got to be honest with you, like, I turned it on the other day for the first time in a while. We were actually just using the Apple TV as a device to stream something. And when the streaming wasn't working, I went to Disney because someone told me about the Mandalorian behind the scenes stuff. Pretty fascinating, by the way. I loved watching the behind the scenes Jon Favreau situation. That's a tangent. My point being is, like, I'm still trying to find something to watch on Disney Plus. And when Verizon stops paying my bill for me and I have to decide, it still feels like the content is kind of weak. So maybe some of this fourth quarter pressure is to convert some of that so they don't have a subscriber drop going into Q1 2021.
Yeah, I think the reality is there's going to be churn on all these platforms because you can cancel so easily. There's no commitments. So I think there's going to be a lot of churn across all the OTT platforms. I don't think it's just going to be one or the other. I think Disney Plus had the sort of uptake, one, because their user interface was very friendly and basic and you understood it.
Yeah.
Like an Amazon Prime Video, which is still needs work. Peacock's a little confusing. Hulu's gotten better with their recent invention of their UI, but Disney definitely had the heads up, but they also had the brand.
Yeah.
And the reality is that your point about original content is very well taken, because most of the watching is on sort of the older films. Like, most kids are just watching Frozen 2 50 times over.
Yeah.
They're not watching Diary of a Future President. They're not watching, they're watching The Mandalorian because that's the one very popular original content that they actually have, but they don't have a lot of it. And I think that's the struggle. And I think part of the decision behind this sort of reorg was to sort of fast track content for Disney Plus, because they know they don't have enough. And at a certain point, when things return to normal and the vaccine is out in the world and everyone starts going back to the movie theaters, they're going to need to have original content there to keep people locked in, because it will be easy to cancel. So I think that's another part of the strategy behind this sort of shifting focus, to sort of separating out distribution from the actual content creators.
Yeah, well, or figure out really the integration model that has to be in place with people clearly willing to stay at home and watch some of the first run entertainment that Disney's putting out there instead of going to a theater. And I feel like the theater experience is shifting for people's minds, so they're not necessarily thinking that paying $25-$30 to watch a film at home, a first run film at home, is a bad deal.
Yeah.
You know, if I was going to go to the theater, like right now, you know, to go to a theater with my family is going to cost me about the same money anyway. And then what's the theater experience anyway? You know, like it's kind of shifted, and the energy isn't in the space.
Yeah.
So Disney is going to have again, maybe some inflated earnings for a while, and the pandemic's hurting them in one area with the parks, but obviously I think boosting them up a little bit of area on the Disney Plus side. But they're going to struggle. Original content is probably the hardest thing to try to figure out. Netflix still hasn't figured it out, and they're still playing some of that original content game. I feel like the number of shows they cancel, the cancellation rates that they have going on is always a talk within the trades. Nobody can see the matrix, so we have no idea why Netflix chooses to continue a show or not.
Right.
But it's hard, and we talk about all the time. I pick on them all the time of just like, it's the original stuff isn't the greatest stuff that they have going on.
No, I mean they do suffer at times from a quality issue. I mean they have their big publicity type films which get a lot of press for them and they look great, but ultimately the TV side of things, it's often just getting things out as quickly as possible. And they had a Ted and the new head of TV content they were at a conference this past week, and it was interesting listening to both of them talk because one, the new head said, Bella, I'm gonna brutalize her name.
Yeah, Bajaria.
Thank you, Tim. She came out and said, well, we typically keep 67% of our shows, which is industry standard. So here we are, this big disruptor OTT called Netflix, which is now just saying, oh, we're just following the industry, what they do. And then you have Ted who comes out and says, well, we at Netflix don't necessarily look at, because the old model was always that you wanted to get at least 4 seasons so you could go syndication because that's where the money was made. We don't look at it like that. So if a story can be told in 1 season or 2 seasons, then that's what we'll do. And that's, the only reason we're getting all attention is because this is how the business used to operate.
So it seems like Ted is saying like the Netflix way of thinking of a season really is almost like the story arc of a film, right? Like they can tell, and I actually kind of enjoy watching some of the longer form pieces in the episodic. There's something about that format that's helpful, easier to consume than sitting through a 2.5 hour film when it actually takes 8 hours to kind of reveal the storyline. Yeah. So I do think that the OTT model allows for that kind of presentation. Mm-hmm. But Keith, there's got like the efficiency of scale when you're doing multiple seasons. I mean, really the burnout rate for the creative, when you're going to have to make a brand new show every year in order to keep making your paycheck, opposed to make a show that has 4 seasons, 5 seasons, 10 seasons. I mean, there's such a cash cow when it comes to a creative ability. Sure. I mean, a cash cow when it comes to the financial ability on season after season. Sure. But I also think there's creative burnout if you have to honestly make new pieces. And maybe what Netflix is realizing is that there's so much talent willing to work with them. They basically are, just picking and choosing. They don't have to be selective.
It's interesting through all this reorg, which saw Cindy Holland leave and several other executives walk out the door as well. They also brought in somebody to oversee the big rich deals that they've signed with like Ryan Murphy and the like, because they want to make sure they're getting they're getting the most for their money. And they brought somebody in specifically to oversee those deals, and that's sort of like their new purview. So it's sort of molding into the traditional network model where you had deals and you had people overseeing those deals. And you did this on the film side as well. You usually had an executive who was in charge of overseeing a deal and making sure that the director or producer or whoever you sign with is delivering on what they're being paid. And Netflix is paying a ton of money, and they want to just make sure that they're getting their true dollars worth. And the other thing is with this is that Netflix doesn't own a lot of their shows that are hits. So, and we talked about this a few weeks ago.
That's true.
So they're not getting that revenue of just being a wholly original Netflix produced production. So I think that's sort of the idea behind just pushing out as much content as possible. And if you look at the numbers, a lot of the shows that people are still watching are licensed content. So they've got to get those licensed content numbers down, because eventually all that stuff is going home back to whoever owns it, because unless it's Sony Pictures, because they don't necessarily have a OTT service yet. Yeah. So some of those are going back.
Do you think Netflix thinks like this though? Like, we'll take your original content and we're just gonna wring it out. We're gonna get every single viewer out, and then sure, we'll return it to you, but like it's just scraps that they're giving back. they don't really care because they're just trying to burn hours instead of actually create a library. You know, like what good is a long-term library anyway for people if there's infinite content happening all the time? It makes you kind of wonder if some of what I can't remember what his name is, but the guy at Netflix, Ted, what he was saying is like the old models don't work anymore. Like the old way of measuring things don't work anymore. We're not looking at things of like, oh, I could build up a show and then send it to syndication because I have the rights to it over and use it over and over and over again. Netflix doesn't seem to be a place to retain that kind of usage, right? Really, what it is, it's a long tail where they can store it for a while, and when it's time for you to finally discover it, you'll watch it. But I don't know if I'm going to watch it like my parents watched MASH every night. You know, like watch the same episode for the 8th or 9th time. I don't know if that kind of viewing habit's really going to be there.
No, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think a lot of what Netflix has done is, this is to Ted's point. I mean, the model before Netflix came along was you'd shoot a pilot, and the pilot was trying to cram in as much information as possible to try to get an executive excited to greenlight a whole season. Where now Netflix just greenlights a whole season, so you have the entire 8 episodes to tell your story.
Sure.
So that in a way is sort of shifted it as well. But to your point, it's like, how many times are you going to want to watch that episode of MASH before you're going to be like, okay, I need something new? And I think Netflix is banking on that, which is why they're constantly snagging these big time creators from their homes at their traditional networks to bring them over to Netflix so they can build that stable of original content, so that when the stuff goes home, the viewers won't necessarily follow.
Sure. Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? I guess in my mind, there's just something like the director. Like I can't imagine J.J. Abrams, you know, trying to make a new show every year for Netflix. Like I think that he'll make a feature film. There's a certain release quality and whatever to that. And I'm speculating. I don't know J.J. Abrams at all, but I feel like Netflix doesn't put the director first in a lot of ways of thinking things. They'll burn through production and director talent soon, only putting the actor talent on the screen and giving them the notoriety. And I think it's going to affect Hollywood. I don't, you know, it's going to commoditize one of the more genuine trades that we have.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is, you know, from what I've heard, that Netflix is, the standard model for Netflix was, here's your money, go shoot your show. Okay, we'll see you when you're ready, when it's done. That is sort of not happening anymore. They're becoming more involved. They're giving notes on scripts. So that leads me to believe that there is a sense that we've kind of got to rein some things in here and maybe work on the quality a little bit. So I mean, there's definitely some shifts happening for sure over there in terms of how they're sort of viewing their content and producing it.
So it seems like if you're, you know, kind of wrap it up, but like, it seems like if you've been a longtime Hollywood person and you have this network of people that you've worked with, a list of shows that you've done, kind of we'll just say like, you know, a solid resume of work and people that you've worked with and connections that you had. That is what's the big shift that's happening in Hollywood, is that they're not resting on that resume anymore. There seems to be like other strategies that they're looking at. Really, like they're chasing the money to where the subscribers are, the commodities that they need to, and the volume that they have to output on these platforms is really shifting. And therefore, some of the loyalty that you have as a filmmaker or creator or studio partner or whatever that stuff is, that's the stuff I think that's not buzzing anymore. I don't hear that or see that or feel like those relational partners are kind of being played out. What are your thoughts? Are you kind of picking up on that too? It's just like the loyalty part's gone?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a sense that that's definitely fading. Like if you think back to sort of some of the old school, you know, deals, big time studio deals, like, you know, Ridley Scott's been at Fox for most of his career. You know, Ryan Murphy was discovered at Fox. Like you know, Dana Walden basically built his career at Fox, and then he jumped ship. I mean, she's not at Fox anymore, but he went, you know, she went to Disney and he went to Netflix.
Yeah.
You see a lot of this sort of like where the paycheck is versus where the relationships are, which is definitely a shift in the industry because so much of this business is relationship based.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's how you build the trust with the person. That's how you know what they're, when they say, I need $5 million and another 3 days of shooting to get this done, you can be like, yes, you delivered for me before, you deliver now. And that relationship doesn't really exist anymore. And now it's about squeezing as much out of that dollar as you possibly can. And I think to that's definitely sort of a sad state of affairs for the industry as a whole, because I think when that happens, I think sometimes the creative starts to suffer because that trust isn't necessarily there and the relationship hasn't been built over several years. And, you know, deals aren't the rich studio deals where you've had, you know, a bunch of producers at their bungalows on the lot. Those days are going away, where it's just basically like you just shop it around until somebody says yes. And I think that's the detriment of the business as a whole, because that relationship was so much a part of how people's careers were built in the past. And how so much great creative was produced because there was that relationship and that trust.
Yeah, it'd be curious, kind of like how the next generation has to deal with some of that feed. You know, going back to just you holding the Oscar and the relationship that you have at New Line, that idea there was a family feeling. I think maybe at the production company level it's still there, but there's something really valuable and important when it comes to making content that you get your team, you can put the trust in them, you know that they can deliver.
Yep.
All those are such important elements, and we take it for granted because all we're really doing is consuming the content they made, but the effort behind the scenes takes a strong team. So I think loyalty of brand or loyalty of person to studio is some of what we're going to see shift more and more, and really see it play out. I just don't want to see Hollywood become commoditized. It would be very unfortunate to take all this great talent.
I think the sad part is the reality of so much things shifting to streaming is it is really becoming commoditized.
Yeah.
Which is sad. I mean, my hope is that when things return to normal and everyone starts going back to the theater, we'll have a reinvigorated, I should say, theatrical experience. And people will remember why they go to the theaters. But again, I think the industry as a whole is going to need to start reminding people of that.
Yeah,
why the theatrical experience is so important.
Right, exactly it. And what the overall community feeling is of what we're doing. Pop culture works the way where we can all relate together. It's the water cooler phenomenon of like we all can relate to it because we have a similar experience in watching the content or experiencing the film, the song, the moment, whatever that is that's out there.
Yep.
All right, my friend, I think our half hour is up. It honestly wasn't enough because I think we're getting into some meat of what it really means to be making and be part of the Hollywood community. And some of what we're talking about with our friends, recognize that's going on. And the reason why we do this show is really to kind of relate all these mega trends to some of the decisions we have to make every day with our clients, our friends, the work that we're doing. So
absolutely.
I really do appreciate you. Thanks for joining, and thanks for keeping the movie posters coming. I think a good nod to the people that are behind the scenes.
I've still got 5 tubes left, so we're still heartily supplied for the next few weeks at least.
That's wonderful. We might have to appeal to some of our audience to send us some movie posters. And
that's not a problem. I've got enough connections that I can just once theaters actually once they start producing movie posters again. I'll start ordering some so we can get some new release stuff up here.
And again, if we run out, I know there's a hallway in Philadelphia somewhere with a bunch of film posters sitting in.
Indeed. And I seriously, there'll be some Led Zeppelin records there too, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Lydia, thank you again for producing this show and keeping us on mark, making sure that we're doing what we need to do, and all that you're doing for us on social media side. We appreciate you and the people behind the scenes. My team at RevThink, you guys are wonderful. Thanks for all you're doing on a weekly basis. And Keith, you are the superstar of this show. All the stuff that you send me to make the connections, appreciate you. Come here every week. We look forward to more of what you have to say next week and some of the other relationships you're going to bring forward. Again, I think we have a challenge.
A lot of exciting guests coming up.
Yeah, that's the challenge really is just keep up with all the people you have. That's the goal of the show. Hey, if you love this show, please subscribe. Subscription helps us and it helps you so that you know what's going on. And we thank you, and we'll see you again on Hollywood Breaks.